감당할 수 있겠니?
In our headlines on this Monday afternoon, November 27th, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo is in Paris for the General Assembly of the International Bureau of Expositions on Tuesday local time that will decide the host city of the 2030 World Expo. Meanwhile, foreign ministers representing Seoul, Beijing and Tokyo met in Busan on Sunday and addressed, among other matters, the prospects of speeding up plans for a trilateral summit. And in the Middle East, the hostage prisoner swap between Israel and Hamas continues, with hopes of an extended ceasefire shared by the Palestinian militant group. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo is in Paris for the General Assembly of the International Bureau of Expositions, better known as the BIE, on Tuesday, during which a secret ballot will decide the host city of the 2030 World Expo. As the co-chair of the bid committee for Busan, the Prime Minister took to his social platform before departure on Sunday to pledge to do his best until the end to bring home the global event. A final presentation will take place prior to the crucial ballot on Tuesday, as Busan shares its plans to promote the World Expo into a platform that tackles common challenges including rampant conflict, climate change and digital divide. Busan is competing against Riyadh and Rome. And as we await the result of the vote on Tuesday by members of the International Bureau of Expositions in Paris, our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin chronicles Busan's campaign to bring home the 2030 World Expo. Do take a look.
The decision on which country will host the 2030 World Expo is just around the corner. South Korea's second-largest city, the southern port city of Busan, is competing against Saudi Arabia's Riyadh and Italy's Rome. While this year has been packed with expo-related events, Busan's preparation started years before.
Busan's efforts to host the expo have been ongoing since 2016. Throughout the last 7 years, South Korea as a whole and the city government have worked hard. For example, Busan promoted its expo bid to regions that it did not have close contact with before, such as Africa.
Korea has gone all out to bring the expo to Busan. Designating the 2030 World Expo Busan as a national task, President Yoon, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, and Foreign Affairs Minister Park Jin traveled to dozens of countries to rally support. President Yoon even took the stage as a speaker during Busan's fourth presentation to the Bureau International des Expositions. The private sector joined forces too, with the leaders of Samsung, SK, Hyundai Motor, and LG going overseas as economic delegations, promoting the Busan Expo by screening promotional videos and installing large-scale advertisements. According to the Prime Minister, government officials and business leaders visited 180 countries, all told. Businesses also worked diligently at home to boost domestic interest.
We teamed up with the Busan city government to establish this designated area for the 2030 World Expo in hopes of bringing it to Busan.
I didn't know that Korea had prepared so much for the Expo bid. It makes me realize how important this is. I really hope Busan wins.
Renowned cultural figures joined in too. BTS held a free concert in Busan, and soprano Cho Soo-mi, along with singer Psy and aespa's Karina, took part in Busan's BIE presentation. But the heart of Busan's campaign lies with the unrivaled enthusiasm of the people living there. Thousands welcomed the BIE when they arrived at Busan train station in April for an on-site visit.
I would go after almost 20 years in expos, and I have been on many inquiry missions throughout expos. I don't think I have ever seen such an enthusiasm in the local population for an event.
Behind this was the Citizens Committee on Busan's bid for the 2030 World Expo, which also organized the Gwanghwaneori Fireworks Festival and expo-themed movie and music festivals with the public.
Busan has experience hosting major international events like the World Cup and Asian Games. So we have the know-how, the facilities and efficient transport infrastructure. That's why Busan is ready to successfully host the expo.
With fingers firmly crossed, all that's left now is for the 182 BIE member countries to make a decision in Paris on November 28th.
부산 화이팅!
파이팅!
부산 엑스포 화이팅!
부산 화이팅!
송유진, Arirang News.
And President Yoon Suk-yeol is back home, having concluded a week-long diplomatic agenda in Europe that started with a state visit to London and a support campaign in Paris. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young has a recap and more.
Seoul is building its clout as a trusted security partner in the Indo-Pacific region. That's according to experts following President Yoon Suk-yeol's visit to the United Kingdom and France last week. Emphasising their shared values of freedom, human rights and the rule of law, Yoon's Downing Street Accord with UK leader Rishi Sunak showed an unprecedented level of security cooperation between the two sides, featuring deals on supply chains and the development of sensitive dual-use technologies. Co-developing artificial intelligence and quantum technologies to target North Korean missiles, as well as cybersecurity, which could act as a bridge to strengthen Seoul's links with the Five Eyes intelligence group, consisting of the UK, the United States, New Zealand, Australia and Canada, was also part of the deal.
The willingness to share intelligence with other countries, in this case South Korea, shows a high level of trust in the government of South Korea, also in the intelligence gathering capabilities of South Korea, the military of South Korea as well, right? So in a sense, it's proof that South Korea is considered to be a reliable partner by all these countries. Now, on top of that, these countries can gather intelligence that South Korea cannot, for example, in the Middle East, for example, in Russia. Even if we look at China, for example, they have different assets.
Seoul also reaffirmed its value-based cooperation with Paris, agreeing to work together on AI and quantum technology as Presidents Yoon and Macron exchanged views on North Korea's weapons collaboration with Russia and the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, particularly as South Korea begins its 2-year tenure as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council next year. South Korea has also been looking to multilateral platforms and like-minded partners to tackle global challenges that threaten peace, freedom and the rule of law in the international community.
First of all, because we have seen, as a result of growing US-China competition, but also the Trump administration being in office in the past, how South Korea has been looking at other potential partners, not to replace the US, but really to complement what it gets from the US-Japan cooperation with Korea is very much driven by specific security threats. And I think in the case of Europe, this is not necessarily the case.
Beyond security and economic interests, South Korea has also grown its capacity to contribute to global development. The country's bid to host the 2030 World Expo has been highlighted as the chance to foster global solidarity towards the goals of tackling inequality, climate change, and emerging digital challenges that affect all societies. Presenting Busan as the world's solutions platform based on Korea's own transformation from a war-torn nation to a digital and cultural powerhouse, Yoon has held over 150 summits with 96 countries since its inauguration last year. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in the port city of Busan this past weekend, for the first time in well over 4 years, top diplomats of Seoul, Tokyo and Beijing held trilateral talks to address issues of regional interest. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji reports.
Top diplomats of South Korea, Japan and China sat down for talks on Sunday and agreed to expedite preparations for the upcoming summit between their leaders. The three officials met here at the Durimaru APEC House in Busan and reaffirmed their efforts to hold a trilateral summit at the earliest convenient time. Following the meeting that lasted for about an hour and a half, Seoul's Foreign Minister Park Jin explained that the three officials have decided to put trilateral cooperation back on track as soon as possible.
We'll continue to work to make sure that the holding of the summit can be materialized in the near future.
Park's Japanese and Chinese counterparts Yoko Kamikawa and Wang Yi also highlighted the importance of cooperation between the three countries.
China will work together with South Korea and Japan to put the trilateral cooperation back on track and maintain a sound and steady development of trilateral relations.
I hope today's foreign ministers meeting could become the opportunity for the three countries to resume trilateral cooperation.
The last summit between the presidents of the three countries was held in December 2019 in China. It has not taken place for more than 4 years, largely due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but also because of strained relations between Seoul and Tokyo. South Korea, as the chair of the upcoming summit, had hoped to hold a meeting before the end of this year. But the three countries have yet to agree on a specific date, and with a little more than a month remaining, arranging a meeting in 2023 is proving difficult. The Korean government is now reportedly aiming for it to take place sometime early next year. Meanwhile, ahead of the three-way talks, Park also held separate meetings with his Japanese and Chinese counterparts. While meeting the Chinese foreign minister, Park urged Beijing to play a constructive role in persuading North Korea to halt provocations. In response, Wang said China has always played and will continue to play the role needed to help stabilize the situation on the Korean peninsula. During talks with Japan's foreign minister, the two sides discussed issues including a recent South Korean High Court ruling that ordered the Japanese government to compensate victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery. Park reiterated Seoul's position that it respects the agreement made in 2015 with Tokyo, which says the two countries agreed to finally and irreversibly resolve the issue. But Kamikawa called the court verdict extremely regrettable and urged South Korea to take appropriate measures. 배은지, Arirang News, Busan.
Seoul, Tokyo and Washington held naval drills in waters off the coast of Korea's Jeju-do Island this past Sunday. The drills involved U.S. aircraft carrier USS Carl Vinson, which arrived in Busan last Tuesday in a show of strength amid Pyongyang's persistent provocations, including a spy satellite launch later on the same day. Sunday's trilateral training comes a day after North Korea's claim that its satellite had taken pictures of U.S. Army bases in South Korea, Hawaii and Guam. In the Middle East, the hostage-prisoner exchange between Israel and Hamas continues, with the Palestinian militant group raising the possibility of an extended pause in fighting. Our Ising-jae has details.
On the third day of hostage releases on Sunday, Hamas released 17 hostages, including 13 Israelis, in exchange for 39 Palestinians who had been held at Israeli detention centers. 33 of the Palestinians released by Israel were minors. The exchange came despite a delay of several hours after Hamas accused Israel of violating the agreement, but the issue was resolved through the mediation of Qatar and Egypt. The New York Times reported on the harsh conditions that the hostages faced through the stories of relatives who had spoken to those released by Hamas. The newspaper reported that the hostages lived in complete isolation from the outside world and returned looking emaciated. They mainly ate rice and bread, but there were times when they could not eat, leading to some of them losing as much as 6 to 8 kilograms during the ordeal. Among the released hostages from Gaza was a 4-year-old American girl who had been left orphaned after her parents were killed during the October 7th attack. While praising her release, U.S. President Joe Biden also called on the need to extend the ceasefire so that more hostages can be released moving forward.
That's my goal. That's our goal, to keep this pause going beyond tomorrow so that we can continue to see more hostages come out and surge more humanitarian relief into those who are in need in Gaza.
The Associated Press reports that Hamas is willing to release more hostages in exchange for an extended ceasefire. Citing sources close to the Palestinian militant group, they're willing to release an additional 20 to 40 hostages. With 58 hostages being released in the first 3 days of the 4-day temporary ceasefire so far, it's still short of the reported 240 people taken captive by Hamas on October 7th. Meanwhile, in a video statement to President Biden, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he is open to extending the current ceasefire, but once it is over, the military's ground operation will return in full force. According to the Prime Minister, while the current 4-day agreement can be extended to allow more hostages to be released, he stressed that at the end of the deal, Israel will continue its operations to destroy Hamas. Ising-jae, Arirang News.
Here on the local front, third quarter findings show food prices surged past household disposable income. According to Statistics Korea, on this Monday, household disposable income grew 3.1% on year to hit an average of just above $3,000. Consumer prices also rose by 3.1%, but those specifically for processed foods and dining out jumped 6.3% and 5.4% respectively, implying that food prices are weighing down on household budgets. Officials point out this trend has been persistent for 5 straight quarters. Seoul's Economy Ministry has shared intentions to better support emerging industries by easing bureaucratic red tape. Our Lee Soo-jin explains.
South Korea's government is taking steps to bolster emerging industries by reforming and improving current regulations. Finance Minister Chu Kyo, in an emergency meeting on the economy with related ministers on Monday, said that while South Korea's economy is showing signs of recovery, the government needs to continue fostering promising businesses in the biohealth, green technology, and ocean mobility industries. One way the government is planning to do this is in the biohealth industry, where clearer standards will be set for newly created health services. It also plans to ease regulations that will encourage the development of healthcare services that use smart technology.
We plan to expand the scope of permitted new medical services by revising guidelines that will encourage the launch of various healthcare services, such as those that will help patients monitor blood pressure and diabetes.
And the biohealth industry is not the only area that the government is planning to reform. In the green technology industry, the government is looking to ease regulations to allow for more revamping and repowering of old solar and wind power plants and support the entry of carbon capture companies into industrial complexes. It also plans to discuss ways to expand tax support for low-carbon aviation fuels. As part of its efforts to go green and boost emerging industries, the South Korean government has set a target to expand the global market share of the domestic smart ocean mobility sector to 12% by 2027. This comes as the International Maritime Organization adopted a strategy to reach net zero emissions from international shipping by around 2050 and set targets to enact a regulatory code for maritime autonomous surface ships by 2028. To expand global market share, the South Korean government plans to boost the transition from fossil fuels to alternative fuels for ships by providing various subsidies and tax benefits. It would also further support R&D for the development of green ship technology. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
And K-pop album exports hit a fresh high during the January to October period, surpassing $240 million. According to the Korea Customs Service back on Sunday, total export album sales surged 20.3% on year during the first 10 months of 2023. Exports were driven by a 67.3% expansion in shipments to the U.S. In contrast, album exports to neighboring China plunged more than 51%. Industry insiders have called for close monitoring of these conflicting export trends. Pop-up stores are seeking to better target young consumers by setting up shop in trendy neighborhoods and by offering photo opportunities as well as other fun activities. Our Park Ko-nu was out and about.
People wait outside pop-up stores even before opening hours in the cold weather. Among those people, it is easy to spot a lot of so-called Zalfas, a word used to describe members of Gen Z born between 1996 through 2009, and the Alpha generation born after 2010. And an increasing number of pop-up stores catering to Zalfa-aged visitors have been appearing, especially in places such as Seongsu, where about 100 pop-up stores open monthly.
I'm here at a pop-up store located in Seongsu, Eastern Seoul, the site of many pop-up stores. At this store, I'll be riding this boat, one of the activities here that mainly targets the so-called Zalfa generation.
Inside, there are a variety of activities for the Zalfa generation to enjoy. The group is also referred to as funsumers because they tend to seek out fun experiences while buying products.
It's great to know what kind of products companies sell and what I can experience through pop-up stores.
To target these funsumers, brands are working hard to make special pop-up stores.
Following the relaxing of COVID-19 measures, pop-up stores have been a great offline marketing means. Brands are trying their best to show their identity while competing with other brands.
She added, through these efforts, over 1,000 people visit the store daily on average, with Zalfest accounting for around 70% of total visitors. She also said that sales at pop-up stores are not as much as the investment put in. According to a professor of consumer science, another reason pop-up stores are popular with the Zalfa generation is that they can make good locations for photos, which can then be posted on social media. The professor also shared negative aspects of these stores.
As these stores open for about 2 to 3 weeks, there's a lot of waste after they close. Also, the high cost of opening stores means a higher price for products.
Though she was concerned about these problems, she predicted that these stores would continue to be popular. However, she said brands would need to be innovative in terms of operation and structure to keep young customers interested in pop-up stores. Park Gon-woo, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Over the weekend, Russia and Ukraine exchanged large-scale drone attacks. Russia on Saturday morning launched its most intense drone attack since the start of the war on Ukraine, and Kyiv replied on Sunday with drones and missiles. No deaths have been yet reported on either side from the attacks. Ukrainian military reported that Russia launched a total of 75 Iranian-made Shahed drones targeting Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Of the 75 drones, 74 were destroyed by Ukrainian air defenses. At least 5 civilians, including an 11-year-old child, were injured, according to the mayor of Kyiv. The Russian Ministry of Defense meanwhile reported that on Sunday, Russia shot down 24 Ukrainian drones over Moscow, Tula, Kaluga, and the surrounding areas. The military also reported of 2 missiles destroyed over the Sea of Azov, and Russian air defenses intercepted 53 Ukrainian drones over Ukrainian territory under Russian control. In China, concerns have been rising over the potential outbreak of new infectious respiratory diseases. Following a request for information by the WHO, a spokesperson from China's National Health Commission said Sunday that a novel virus was not behind the wave of illnesses and that influenza is the main cause, followed by rhinoviruses, pneumonia, RSV, and the adenovirus. While some experts have said that the current conditions are due to the lifting of COVID-19 lockdown restrictions, as exposure to common pathogens had been minimized during lockdown. But outside scientists are asking for the situation to be closely monitored. A cargo ship with 14 crew on board sank off the Greek island of Lesbos on Sunday. One of those aboard has been confirmed dead, with 12 others still missing. The Comoros-flagged cargo ship named Raptor was carrying 6,000 tons of salt from Al-Dakela port in Egypt to Istanbul when it made a distress call to the Greek Coast Guard, reporting a mechanical failure. According to the operating company of the ship based in Lebanon, 11 of the crew were Egyptians, while 2 were Syrian and 1 was an Indian national. Authorities are still searching for the missing crew members. In the world of motorsports, the 2023 Formula One season came to a close in Abu Dhabi on Sunday, with Red Bull's triple world champion, Max Verstappen, first past the checkered flag. This year's competition was dominated by Team Red Bull, and Verstappen's latest win meant he was number 1 in 19 out of the 22 races, breaking the record for the most single-season wins. The 26-year-old is now 3rd place in Formula One's all-time list of winners, with the 54th win of his career. The 2024 F1 season begins again in Bahrain next March, with 2 additional races, making it a record 24 Grand Prix. Kim Ji-young, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Wet clouds are dropping light on and off showers in most areas since early this morning. Northern parts of Gyeonggi-do could see up to 10 millimeters, and the rest of the country could see some spotty rain, so keep an umbrella handy today. But rain could turn to snow in mountainous regions of Gangwon-do province. Not much to complain about temperature-wise today, but as you might have guessed, after today's precipitation lets up and skies become clear, freezing air will move into the country and will wrap up the November on a freezing note. But for now, let's check on today's highs. Top temperatures should stay slightly higher than seasonal norms. Seoul seeing highs of 10 degrees this afternoon. Busan and Jeju warm and cozy at 17 degrees, with some late afternoon sunshine expected in Busan. Icy cold mornings to persist through the week. Stay bundled while the skies will remain mostly sunny in the capital area this week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And that ends Monday's afternoon newscast. But do stay with us for our panel session coming up right after this break. Thank you for now.
Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? I'm live.
저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해주시는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 이거 없지 펜션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고
좋아요.
contour the world? Simply contour. India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. Are you excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's lying? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
웰컴. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
On today's edition of Issues and Insiders, a renowned scholar shares his thoughts about Busan's prospects of hosting the 2030 World Expo and, more broadly, the importance of that particular year as well. Hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching Monday's edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min San-hee. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with a scholar for his thoughts on Busan's chances, that is, of winning the bid to bring home the 2030 World Expo and more. For this, I have Professor Maru Gyan at the University of Pennsylvania live on the line. Professor Gyan, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Bonnie, for inviting me.
Professor Gyan, I believe you were in Korea a while back, that is, to attend a conference on Busan's prospects of hosting the 2030 World Expo. What do you believe is Busan's edge over the competition for this particular bid?
Well, I think Busan is becoming a global city in so many different ways. It's deeply embedded in international trade and it has a very vibrant cultural activity. So I think it is very well positioned to obtain this distinction. Let's see what happens, though. Fingers crossed.
Right, my fingers crossed as well. Professor Gyan, the conference I mentioned was actually back in the year 2021, I believe, and it also included a closed session. That being said, were there any areas that pundits like yourself believe that Busan could work on to perhaps boost its chances of winning this bid?
Well, I think there's a number of things that cities can do. I mean, the first priority, I think, should always be to have an environment that is safe, that is welcoming, and that people would like to essentially travel to and spend some time at. Without that, it's very difficult to win distinctions such as this. That is the number one priority. After that, of course, comes having a very good transportation infrastructure and having, as Busan already has, many connections, many linkages to other big cities around the world.
Professor Gyan, what do you care to highlight then as the potential gains that Busan, and of course to a greater extent that Korea as a country, could look to secure by hosting the 2030 World Expo?
Well, I think all of these expo events are magnets. They attract a lot of attention. And I think it is important for a country such as South Korea to have other cities besides Seoul being world-class, being global cities that can have an impact on the world. So bringing the 2030 Expo to Busan, I think, would fulfill all of those requirements there. And most importantly, it will bring business to Korea. And at this point, I think it is something that would be very good for the economy. Very good for Busan, but also very good for the South Korean economy as a whole.
Do you believe World Expos, to a great extent, serve to perhaps just boost a country's economy? Or is there more that can be secured from hosting a World Expo?
Look, there are two tangible benefits from hosting such an important event. The first benefit is that, people come in, they bring money. There is a direct injection of cash into the economy. The second benefit is more intangible, which is the image, the reputation, the brand name of the city and the country also get a boost. And that, I think, oftentimes is neglected, but it is really important, and it could actually have a much bigger long-term impact than anything else. So in other words, a city that has hosted such a big event as an expo will be remembered around the world for doing so.
Right. Professor Jan, some say that geopolitics and not a candidate city's qualifications will dictate the vote for the 2030 World Expo, given the current geopolitical concerns around the world. What do you say?
Well, this is always a consideration. That is to say, when countries vote for a candidate to become the host of, let's say, the Olympic Games or a major sporting event in, for example, football or an expo, they will take into account all sorts of things. But the good news, Bonnie, is that South Korea has a very good reputation. You are a country that gets along with every country in the world, I would say. So, in other words, you have everything going that way from a geopolitical point of view. I don't think that is in any way going to represent a handicap for Busan or for South Korea. In fact, I believe the contrary, that it will be a bonus.
Professor Jan, what is the relevance of an expo in today's world of convenient travel as well as comfortable exposure to diverse culture and, of course, technology?
Well, again, South Korea is known as a country that has produced very important technologies, especially consumer-oriented technologies in electronics and the internet, digital platforms, and so on and so forth. Korea has become not only an exporter of goods, but also an exporter of services, including culture, like movies or music. So hosting an event such as this, I think, just contributes to creating this kind of an image of a country that has a lot to offer to the rest of the world. And in particular, also a city, Busan, that has so much to offer to the rest of the world.
And with all that in mind, Professor, how can the lucky city that wins the vote, of course, on November 28th, that is this Tuesday for the 2030 World Expo, work to ensure a remarkable and relevant event?
Well, I think the most important thing is to convey confidence. That is to say that Busan can organize this kind of an event, that it has the skills, it has the motivation to organize an event such as this. You also need to signal that the population of Busan is solidly behind this, because you would want people to attend the events. You don't want any venue to be sparsely populated. You want, full audiences and so on and so forth. So the more commitment, the more confidence that you can display between now and the big decision day, I think will essentially increase your chances of obtaining the big prize.
Professor, again, beyond the World Expo itself, the year 2030 appears to be of much interest to you as well. You published a book, I believe, in 2020 about how today's biggest trends will collide and reshape the future of everything in 2030. Now, among the changes that you speak of, Professor, is the reality that more grandparents than grandchildren's will be there in the world in that particular year. Now, this is a reality that Korea itself is also quite concerned about. Is there a way to reverse this particular trend?
Well, you're pointing out something that is really important. It's happening in every country in the world, which is population aging. We have a bigger proportion of the population, let's say above the age of 50 or above the age of 60. But you're also correct in saying that among all countries in the world, South Korea is perhaps one of the countries, along with Japan and China, that are more advanced in terms of this trend towards population aging. And that's because your fertility rate, the number of babies per woman, is one of the lowest, if not the lowest, in the world. So the only way really to reverse this is to think about ways in which you can make it easier for young couples, especially the women, to have children. So, of course, in South Korea now, women are very highly educated and they want to pursue their careers, their professional careers. So I think what is really important is that both the government and big employers, the big companies in Korea, they offer these women who want to have a career opportunities for also being mothers. This is really, really important. And the other thing, of course, that at some point, I think countries such as Japan, China, and also yours, South Korea, will need to consider is immigration. So I know that in Northeast Asia, immigration is not something that is the same as, let's say, in the United States or in Canada or in Australia. But I think sooner or later, there will need to be some renewed openness towards immigration, because otherwise it's very difficult to rebalance the age structure of the population so that you have plenty of young people who are in working age.
Professor, with regard to the situation here in the country, some people claim that the birth rate is also linked to the education system in the country, the fact that it is quite, relatively that is, more expensive to educate a child here in the country than in some other parts of the world. Where do you stand with regard to that particular concern?
Yes, that is a very valid concern. So in other words, let's think about young couples, right? So young couples will have more children if they don't think that this is going to disrupt their lives too massively, if they think they can afford an additional child, and if they think that that child will have opportunities. Now, I think opportunities will exist in Korea for those children, because the South Korean economy is relatively dynamic. You have excellent world-class companies and so on and so forth. But you still need to persuade young couples, especially the women, the would-be mothers, to have children or more children. And this is a really important thing to do. And among other things, once again, what you have is to provide them with childcare, to provide them with assurances that they will not have to abandon their career, that they will be able to continue working. And anything that you can do on the cost side, as you suggested, meaning making it cheaper to have a child who can then pursue a great education, that's also something that is going to help.
Right, hopefully. Professor, again, in your book, you also claim that there will be more robots than workers and more computers than human brains. How worried should we as humans be?
I don't think we should be, very worried about it. We should be concerned in the sense that I think the way in which we do our jobs will change. But I don't think it's necessarily the case that our jobs will be eliminated. So, for example, your job as a television anchor or my job as a professor, I think will change as a result of new technologies. It has already changed. So television is not the same as it once was, and teaching at a university is not the same kind of activity as it once was. Technology has already changed our jobs. So I think that should be people's utmost concern. And what people should do is not have fear for these changes. What they should do is prepare for those changes and try to be the best possible professional person in that job, knowing that technology will play an increasing role.
Professor, I understand how that reality may change for me. We have the possibility of AI anchoring the news in the very near future. How has that reality changed for you as a professor when you talk about changes that you're experiencing in your field?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think I would prefer you to be the anchor and not a robot or a computer.
Thank you for your kind words.
I think, for me as a professor, I can become a better professor if I embrace AI, because I can better prepare my classes, I can do better research, and I can also change the way in which I interact with the students. I can offer them more immersive experiences if I combine AI, for example, with the metaverse. So it is up to me as a professor to become better at what I do, to offer my students a far more exciting learning experience than what I've had in the past. So I don't think, as a professor, I should blame the technology. I should blame myself if I don't do everything that I can to incorporate all of these new technologies so that my students can have the best possible learning experience. And as you know, young generations these days, they want to learn through technology. They like using technology as they learn. So I have to change them. It is my responsibility to change.
Keeping that in mind, Professor, again, what technology with regard to the academic arena would you like to see at the 2030 World Expo, a technology that perhaps will promote, enhance the learning environment?
Well, I think perhaps the technology that I see having the most potential, but I want to emphasize its potential because I don't think the current state of the technology is good enough, is the metaverse. Anything that is immersive, so virtual reality, enhanced reality, the metaverse, because you see, in universities, we have been teaching for a long time in the same way. You have the audience in the room and you have the professor in front of them. And I think what we need is to bring to the classroom more immersive experiences. So what we do oftentimes is take the students, of course, on study trips, and that's a way of immersing the students in another context. But with the metaverse, with virtual reality, with enhanced reality, now we can bring the world to the classroom. And we need to work on that, I think, because what is very clear is that immersive learning is always more effective. People learn faster when they are immersed in the topic.
Professor, back to your book then. You also talk about how more global wealth will be owned by women than men in 2030. Do you care to elaborate?
Yes. So what's going on is that women, of course, have been making progress in terms of their careers. Of course, I don't deny that there is discrimination, meaning that oftentimes women are not paid as much as men, and oftentimes also they're not promoted as fast as men. But in spite of that, what we see is that women right now, as we speak, are accumulating wealth faster than men. And if they're doing that now, that means that within a few years, then perhaps more than half of the wealth in the world will be owned by women. And that's what I'm predicting will happen approximately by the year 2030. Now, this is going to have major consequences, of course, but the point is that women are doing better in spite of discrimination in the workplace, in companies, and they are accumulating wealth faster than men. And also, I think this is also true in South Korea. It is certainly true in the United States. There's now more women in universities than men. And not only that, they get better grades. So this happens in my classes. So sooner or later, that's going to have an impact, right? And I don't think women get better grades in university here in the United States, for example, because they're more intelligent than men. It's because I think they work harder, they're more responsible, and they care about their future more than men.
Do you see that particular reality also taking place in countries that are less privileged? For example, in Africa or in parts of Asia, do you see women taking on a greater share of the wealth there as well? In 2030, of course?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Perhaps Africa, no, because they're a little bit farther behind. So it will take maybe another 10 or 20 years for Africa to be where the United States or South Korea or China are going to be by the year 2030. But we see the same trend of women doing better in school, women pursuing a university education, and women, for example, becoming entrepreneurs in greater numbers than in the past. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that the life chances, the career chances of women have increased so much that now the opportunities available to women are so different than the opportunities that were available to their mothers or to their grandmothers. This is one of the most important changes in the world.
And keeping that in mind, Professor, again, how can people, including perhaps my husband, prepare for 2030 when the reality is that I'll be making much more than him, of course, but all jokes aside, what are your suggestions to better prepare for the year 2030 amid these vast changes?
Well, it's going to be tough for men, including myself, because, for the longest time, it seems as if we had a monopoly, right, over jobs and over everything. But again, now women are making a lot of progress. For example, in the United States, among married women who have a husband, 29% of the women who are married in the United States make more money than their husbands. 29%. You see, just 20 years ago, it was only 3 or 4%, but now it's already 29%. And before we realize it, it's going to be more than 50%. So this is changing very quickly. And I think men like myself, or like your husband, what we need to do is to adjust to the situation, which is that we're no longer alone in the workplace. We also have women, and women work very hard, and they're getting ahead.
Right, and hopefully he'll listen to your words when he watches this. Professor, I'm wondering, we're going to end perhaps with a few words more about Busan as it awaits the vote that will take place on Tuesday, the 28th of November. That being said, what are your personal thoughts with regard to Busan's prospects of winning this bid to host the World Expo in the year 2030?
Well, I think I feel very optimistic about it for several reasons. The first is, as I told you, is that I think Busan and South Korea as a country, you project an image to the world of friendliness, of competence, meaning, you're a country that is well-run, well-governed, that it has a dynamic economy. And it is, I think, also the case that Busan has made the right investments in infrastructure, the right investments in terms of building relationships with other parts of the world. It is primarily, of course, a commercial city. So Busan has that big advantage of having all of these relationships with the rest of the world. So I feel confident, but of course, I don't vote and I don't decide. But if it were up to me, I would just, give it to Busan, of course.
Thank you so much for your words. All right, Professor, again, thank you very much for your insights today.
Oh, thank you, Bonnie, for having me. And fingers crossed, I hope that this works for Busan.
All right, I'll keep my fingers crossed as well. Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Issues and Insiders. We return same time tomorrow, so do join us then. Thank you for now.